I think it's very important that each one of us in this room certainly acknowledge and realize that there are very, very tough decisions need to be made in this state, and that everyone needs to realize that K-12 education has been the entity who's been filling the gap for the last 14 years between the state's revenue and expenditures. And it's important that in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, people understand that our school district expects to continue to play an important role in that. However, given that, we believe it's critically important that our community and our elected officials make their decisions based on accurate information. And so this presentation is about education funding and the impact of the governor's proposed budget on K-12 education. So we're going to go through our revenues, how we are funded, our expenditures and how we compare in those expenditures, how we've reduced to provide, how K-12 education understands what it means to tighten our belts, and that we not only educate, but we also take care of people. So if you look at this first slide, we'll begin with the revenues. This chart shows the Sioux Falls School District's budgeted tax-supported funds for FY11. There's basically 5 categories of revenue funds for K-12 public schools. Starting at the top, the Capital Outlay Fund. This fund is established by law, and it's provided to meet expenditures for physical structures, roofs, parking lots, football stadiums, new buildings, remodeled buildings, equipment, real property. It has a $3 maximum levy that's allowed by law, and the Sioux Falls School District levies $2.40. The next fund is the Special Education Fund, established by law to provide for the children with disabilities, to provide for their special education or their special education and related services. The maximum levy allowed is $1.40, and the Sioux Falls School District levies $1.20. The Pension Fund allows the school district to levy an annual tax for the payment of pensions for our retired employees. A 30-cent maximum levy is allowed, and we levy 30 cents. The Bond Redemption Fund allows us to levy annual tax for the payment of our school district bonds. Now when we move into the red area and the blue area, the General Fund Restricted, the General Fund Unrestricted Other, and the General Fund Unrestricted State Aid formula, it's important to understand that the general fund as a whole is what provides for the day-to-day operations of the school district, including the teachers' salaries, the heats, the lights, the counselors, the secretaries. It's this fund we focus on when we speak about state aid. And we divide it into those 3 categories that you see listed here: General Fund Restricted, General Fund Restricted Other, and General Fund Unrestricted State Aid. And I should have said General Fund Unrestricted Other for that second category. The General Fund Restricted is mainly federal programs, and while they're extremely valuable in funding certain programs, they have to be used for specific purposes, and they contain a supplement, not supplant provision. That means we can't use those funds to balance our budget. The General Fund Unrestricted Other is the fund that includes state and county apportionment, bank franchise tax, gross receipts, interest, admissions, and contributions that we might receive. This portion and the General Fund Unrestricted State Aid formula are the 2 areas for which we have discretion in spending, meaning the dollars are unrestricted and we can use them how and where we need to meet the operating expenses of our school district, excluding those of special ed and capital outlay. So when you look at the general fund and then you remove the general fund restricted funds, which are the 6.6% in the red-lined area, state aid accounts for almost 90% of our discretionary funding. And on the expenditure side, 88% of our expenditures are salaries and benefits. Each year, the state aid increases must cover additional operating expenses and benefits, including all of those that go up beyond inflation, such as utilities, health insurance, and taking care of people. And then the budget is balanced on the salary line item. This slide is the governor's slide, and based upon the information I just shared with you on how our funds can be utilized, I have to admit, when I first saw this slide of the governor's, I gasped. This is the governor's comment regarding the information on this slide.
So I'm just pointing out that the per pupil spending, that 4804, is only a little better than half of their overall income. And when you measure the cut against their overall income, it's about 5.4% statewide.
Schools cannot use capital outlay dollars to pay for a 5th grade teacher. The state won't allow it. We cannot use special education dollars to pay for anything but a child with disability and his or her special ed and related services. State law and federal law won't allow it. The governor also includes on his slide a generic category that says other general fund receipts, the bulk of which is comprised of federal grant funds. And as I stated earlier, those grant funds come with strings. We can only use them as designated by the federal government. We can't use them to balance our budget. And if we don't spend them in the way in which the federal government tells us we can spend them, we do not get the money. It's that simple. Just as the state cannot take Medicaid money and give to the schools for state aid, we can't take Title I dollars and turn it around and use it for the district's busing program. At the end of the day, even if these funds could be used in the equation, our federal grants for the FY12 budget are decreasing by $3 million or 25%. In addition, in this category of the other general fund receipts would fall the area for us that includes bank franchise tax. These are decreasing as well. And it does not appear that the governor factored this into his equation. Last year, our biggest source of the general fund unrestricted other were bank franchise tax. It was $5 million. This year, our bank franchise tax has dropped 70% to $1.5 million, a loss of $3.5 million in 1 year's time. Next year, it's projected to fall even further. These other general fund receipts go up and down from year to year, but never ever has an elected official said to us, state aid really isn't increasing 3%, because when you factor in the other funds, it's only going up 2%. Even the governor acknowledges at the state level that certain funds can only be spent in certain ways, and the same is true for us.
Before we go to break, though, I want to ask you quickly about that state cash flow account. Is that a viable thing for us to tap into?
It is not, because most of that, 80–90% of that money is not our money, not the legislature's money to spend on general fund needs. For example, a large percentage of that is the highway trust funds. Gas taxes constitutionally may only be spent on roads, bridges, transportation. We can't spend that on education.
After reflecting on the revenue, I think it's important that we look at how we compare in our expenditures. If you go to the National Center for Educational Statistics website and you type in the Sioux Falls School District, it will provide for you a comparative peer group at the national level that matches us to size and demographic. In the Sioux Falls School District, we spend 28% less per student on expenditures than our peers across the nation. And when you look at the administrative expenses in the Sioux Falls School District, we spend 27% less per student on administrative expenses. Now, typically, administration is the first thing that people think should be attacked or reduced. And each one of us need to understand that even if we were to remove every administrator in the Sioux Falls School District except for the building principal, we would save a little under $3 million. And a 10% cut to our budget is $10 million. We'd still have over $7 million to go. This slide is a virtual tragedy. Everybody knows that South Dakota is 50th in teacher pay. But how many of you realize that if the Sioux Falls School District were a state, we'd be 49th? The only states who would be ahead of us would be North Dakota and South Dakota. We're the third highest paying district in South Dakota, and our teachers make less than the average teacher makes in Mississippi, Oklahoma, or Nebraska. Look where we were in the mid-90s. That is the long-term effect, when you look at that versus where we are today, of a funding formula that gives us 3% or inflation, whichever's less. This slide compares the average increase in the average Sioux Falls School District's teacher salary to that of covered workers in various industries, both in the Sioux Falls metropolitan service area and across the state. Remember when I said that state aid increases have to cover those operating expenses that go up beyond inflation? Health insurance, utilities, taking care of people, and then the budget is balanced on the salary line item? This is more evidence of what happens. This slide shows the average annual increase in salary from 1990 to 1995, the period of time before the current funding formula, and the average increase from 1995 to 2009, the period since passage of the current formula. As you can see, the Sioux Falls teacher lags far behind the next closest groups, who would be state government employees and the Sioux Falls area manufacturing employees. As those of you in this room understand the power of compound interest, the effects of receiving 2.3% versus 3.4% annual increases over 14 years is astounding. Our average teacher pay in FY09 was $42,300, and if the salaries had kept pace with the state employee or the Sioux Falls manufacturing group at 3.4, the average teacher salary would be $49,000.